Welcome everyone to this webinar today, which is a WA Managers Roundtable. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Burrows. I work for WAM, West Australian Music, and I've been organising a series of these webinars. We've been doing one a week during the COVID-19 period and just trying to sort of pick some topics that are relevant and we hope helpful to people in the WA music community. And I've seen a few of you in most of those, so thanks so much for joining us and for your support. I'd also like to acknowledge that for me, and I suspect for many of you, the meeting today is taking place on Whadjuk Noongar land, and particularly at this time as we remember Sorry Day and we think about reconciliation, pay my deep respects to the Indigenous people of this land and to the elders past, present and emerging. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. We have Jake Snell here. Jake has a business called Monster Management. He manages a range of artists including Methyl Ethel, the Beths, who else we've got there? Hatchie, Cloud Control. I'm off the top of my head, Jake, but a whole range of artists. Was based in WA and now lives in LA, where it's 6 p.m. the night before. So, Jake, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really great to have you here. And we also have Haridy, who runs Haridy Management, looks after a really big roster as well, including Jebediah and Eskimo Joe, but is also the director of the Association of Artist Managers. So Kath brings a whole range of experience working with artists and also with artist managers. So I feel like this is a really great opportunity for all of us to draw on Kath and Jake's experience, particularly at this time, which is so difficult for our industry and something that's been really challenging for a lot of us. So, Jake, I'd really like to start just by sort of asking you and clarifying how you see the role of an artist manager and what that encompasses from your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think primarily it's, often said that it's like a CEO position of an artist, which I guess is kind of like is a quicker summary as you can possibly give. But really it's a matter of like working with an artist to facilitate their version of success. And I think that's kind of super important to ascertain what it is that they want to achieve and then finding ways that feel kind of good to them on that path. Other functional parts are, like you really are managing the team around the artist. So whether you're kind of corresponding with publicists, labels, wherever it is, you're pulling together all the information. So when you talk to the artist, you can distill it to the clearest idea of, what they actually need to action. So they have all the information, but not all the kind of debris that can come from, email chains that go for hundreds and hundreds of emails. Don't really kind of uncover and can hit on the deep points. So it is, like working with them to facilitate their goals. I think most simply put, that's the way I kind of treat it.
Kath, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that Jake has outlined. I think it's very much a facilitation role. I also think that there is a level of a sort of duty of care, and there's sort of ethical and moral elements to the job as well, like how you facilitate the information to the artist, as Jake was saying, I think is really important. This is their career, and you're actually pretty much guiding it through the weeds, so to speak. I also think there's a couple of really key things that have to exist between a manager and an artist in terms of success in the relationship itself. And I think trust is like the bedrock of that. Without sort of a mutual trust and understanding, I think the relationship will almost certainly be doomed.
It sounds like it's a really interesting balance of maintaining that relationship, the personal element of the job, but also managing, as you say, that sort of practical side of things. I'm just interested talking on the relationship front, particularly during a time like we're having at the moment with COVID-19. How would you go about ensuring your artist's psychological well-being? Because I imagine it is difficult for some artists who, a lot of their sense of self is drawn from live performance and all that sort of stuff. Jake, how would you go about ensuring that your artists are psychologically sort of in a good place at the moment?
I've generally just been talking to them a lot about what they're doing, and I think that it kind of really gives you a feel for how they are going. Like, I definitely talk to some who are really thriving in the situation as much as that's possible. Like they're comfortable with being inside. Their schedule has allowed for the fact that nothing's really been cancelled and it hasn't disrupted the plans that they had in place. So some are relatively comfortable and are using the time well and are feeling okay. I think still there's a lot of conversations just to have about like what the changing landscape is looking like and being optimistic. I definitely think I've been optimistic without being too over the top and not like taking in the wide scope of everything that's happening. It's very difficult because like early on, I was talking to agents all over the world and everyone that I possibly could, and they were saying various things. And you kind of go like, okay, this is the information. I've pulled all this information. This is what I'm hearing. And then you're like, oh, that actually wasn't true. Like it was really just like get as much information as you can and absorb it and kind of like really take from it. And I think there is solace in action. And, even if you're one agent described it as like he'd rather be running on the spot than standing still, and I was like, that makes sense. Like, I think that kind of is there, and I think a lot of creative people feel that same way. So as long as they feel that is doing something long term, that's quite helpful.
And I mean, Kath, that sort of sounds, similar to what you're saying. It's that there's this process of sort of almost filtering everything you're getting, distilling it, synthesizing the information, and then working out which information needs to be conveyed to the artist and in what manner or whatever. It sounds a bit like that. Jake mentioned earlier, Kath, this idea of the team around the artist. For people who maybe are unfamiliar with this, what sort of people does that team comprise?
Well, it'll vary from artist to artist, but it could comprise any or all of a publisher, a label, radio plugger, promotional or publicity person. There will be graphic designers. There will be people who are making content for digital. There potentially there could be and invariably always are collection agencies such as AMCOS or PPCA that you'd be dealing with on a regular basis. And then there's potentially bookkeepers, accountants, and that whole very, very important business side of the creative process.
It's interesting, and it can be quite a big team. It's a lot of relationships for the manager to kind of keep track of. I just have a question here, Jake, from Chris, who's interested to know how many of your artists have another job or whether they're all full-time artists.
I would say for the most part, they're all full-time artists at this point. Actually, it kind of varies. A majority are full-time artists, with the exception of, say, like Cloud Control are not super active at the moment, so they are all working. And, in that case, Haridy from the band has, been doing a lot of work with Feet, which is like a carbon offset program for touring musicians. Yeah, so, they're very active and enjoy doing things. But, I would say for all the artists that are active, they're all full-time. They've been able to claim JobKeeper as part of, being sole traders. They've been able to stay afloat in this period, which has been really, that's been fantastic. That was kind of like the first thing is what subsidies, I think I did that before I did it for myself, making sure that everyone was able to claim, funds and be able to pay their rent. And for the most part, it actually has been pretty effective. But yes, I would say pretty much everyone that's currently active.
I'm interested to know, Kath, some of the sort of immediate challenges as a result of COVID-19 for you as an artist manager. What were some of the things that you had to sort of deal with straight away as soon as the situation was announced and you realised that, for example, there was going to be no live music and stuff? What were sort of the immediate challenges for you there?
It actually brings up feelings of anxiety for me, even thinking about it.
Does it? Yeah.
It actually does. That first 2 weeks was intense, and I think it was for everybody, whether you're an artist manager or an artist or anybody really in the world. It was a very stressful time. But in that first sort of 10 days particularly, it was just like gig after tour after festival just getting cancelled, and we could so slowly but surely, it was like watching a car crash. see, our whole plan for the next 12 months just completely fall apart, along with obviously the immediate concern of loss of income, which for many of my artists was, is very meticulously planned out, for, survival purposes as it's crucial for their survival. So I sort of alternated between basically talking with booking agents and bookkeepers and accountants to work through both long-term and short-term and long-term cash flow for each of my artists, as well as touching base with the artists just to see how they were doing in all of this, as they were finding out that, again, their livelihoods were being materially affected by this. And the way people responded to this situation was vastly different between individuals. So I had some artists that were very calm about it all and were very methodical in their thinking process through all of this. And then I had other artists who were angry. It was like a grief process for them, and, misplaced anger and all sorts of different things were going on. So there was the challenge of handling that element while also looking at that cash flow, while also dealing with the agents and trying to procure as much of the deposits that they were holding on to at that point for the gigs that were being cancelled, so that we could try and funnel as much money through as we could to the artist accounts to really work out what our bottom line was. And then on top of that, I was also dealing with my own business, which was materially affected because obviously we all derive our income from our artist's income. And that was challenging. And then, of course, working through and with the AAM, I was working with the broader artist management community. So was really feeling and dealing with their grief as well, and trying to funnel through as much information and also advocate on a federal level with other sector organisations and peak bodies in Australia in the music sector to get a result that was going to be meaningful for all of us, which ended up being JobKeeper for the most part, was that.
And grief is a really interesting way of phrasing it, because it really does imply that kind of the depth of feeling and a sense of loss. And I think, as I sort of mentioned earlier, because for so many of these artists, and I guess for you as managers as well, this is, the unique thing about our industry is that it isn't just a job for anybody. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it for the money, let's be honest. So, so there is that sense of identity and all that sort of stuff that gets bound up in this, which makes it that much more complex. I'm interested, Kath, obviously, a period of real stress for so many artists and artist managers. How do you manage that yourself? Have you got sort of a mentor or somebody, you can sort of talk to about that stuff? Because, we've got a small community in Perth of artist managers, and I know it's really hard for some of them to sort of have people to reach out to, particularly at that next tier level,
It's interesting. I think that for me, there were several groups of people. Obviously, my artists. So we were all going through the same thing. So in a sense, we could share that feeling with each other, which unusually in this particular in the relationship, I think it really threw a whole different dimension into the artist manager relationship. That feeling of being under extreme stress and pressure, it was experienced on both levels and shared between the parties. And I also had the broader music community to rely upon as well. So dealing with all of the other sector orgs literally on a daily basis. So, people like Millie Milgate and, Kirsty Rivers and all those wonderful people that work, in other sectors that are materially affected, and being able to share stories with them as well.
Let's talk a little bit about forward planning and sort of the more long-term kind of impact of this situation. Jake, for your artists, at any one time, how far ahead have you planned? Like, what would you have scheduled out in terms of campaigns and tours and stuff like that?
I mean, there were tours up until the end of next year, pretty much, that ended up kind of going differently. We were relatively lucky in how it all played out, because if it was this time last year, we would have had multiple artists right in the thick of album cycles. Luckily didn't have that, but the Beths have definitely been affected in that their album was about to, it's being released on July 10th, and navigating that has been, it's been different. It's definitely been a lot of work to kind of to bring it all together, and it's a shame because they had a sold out US tour. They would be, they had the amount of dates they were going to be doing, 3,000 people in London in October. So there's these things where you just go, I mean, there is obviously there's a loss of income. There's also releasing, the band has worked so hard and you delivered an album, and just as they delivered it, it all happened. So that has been a very complicated experience. We take solace and try and be optimistic where we can and navigate it. I think there's a lot of planning that can come in. One thing that I've been working on a lot at the moment is, traditionally planning models are based on cause and effect. You do something and you realize that that's going to have an outcome. Touring being the most obvious one, where you say, I'm going to tour, which is a given because that's possible, and that will have help growth. You see that's going to happen. As a result, that no longer exists, but the end goal remains solid. That remains something that we know, and we do know we can do things to achieve them. We just don't know that given component. So it's been more about going what is it that's really important, and working backwards from there, and kind of doing a backwards model. And by that way, the paths are ones that haven't been done previously. Traditionally, you take away touring and you think about things in different ways. Streaming, what does it mean? I think that was a very detrimental, early on I feel it was quite detrimental to artists because it was posed as a replacement to the live experience, when it obviously never can be. And I think now it's slowly recalibrating to become more of another thing, where people understand that this will be something that will exist going forward, but it is not a replacement. And I think, once you kind of they are kind of semantics, but it is reframing the way you're looking at a problem to find the best solution.
I'm interested, Jake, because you mentioned obviously the Beth's album being due out in July, and I had a question from Josh that was he was wondering, Kath and Jake, both of you, whether any of your artists had delayed releases until they could tour again. Are there any benefits of releasing music at the moment where you've got this weird sort of captive home audience?
Okay, there are many schools of thought. One is that yes, people are captive. Also, that a lot of the major tentpole releases, especially because they kind of hang on North American summer, are being pushed back. So this period, over the summer, is generally, there's less traffic, and so it's possible if you're kind of a quote unquote mid-level band to get coverage you wouldn't have previously. The other thing is that if you push it back, everyone assumedly is pushing it back. So everyone is anticipating a glut of releases to come about in, say from September onwards, and then also from January, February next year. Especially March next year, people are already flagging that is going to be a very period thick with releases.
Right.
So I think it's been what I have found quite interesting, because this is a conversation that I had with the artists, going we don't really know. We'll probably know in about a year's time whether sticking with this is the right thing to do, because we had the conversation about whether we should or whether we should release or whether we shouldn't. With the Best, it is an album about being away from your friends and missing people, and about community, and it felt like there was something that could be really shared with people through that process. And also that, they can write another record. We know that we can do that. It's a great record, and I hope people love it as much as they would have if they were able to tour. But, there's another record to be made, and, everyone that's on the team is super supportive, labels, for it. So, yeah, it's a question. But one thing that I think is interesting is, there was a huge push from like top tier like pop artists to push everything back. So like Lady Gaga pushed back Chromatica, Haim pushed back their records, everyone like going all the way back. But as soon as Fiona Apple like released hers early and said, I'm going to do what I want, and that album was kind of pretty universally like applauded, and people were like, this is connecting with me. And I, potentially I would say that record benefited from its timing. You saw like Gaga push it back, push the album that was pushed back to further, and Haim as well. Everyone went, actually, no, we're wrong. We're going to push it forward.
Yeah, very interesting. Have you sort of delayed any of yours, Kath? Any of your artists really changed their planned schedules other than touring?
Completely. I had a whole plan through to mid next year for Eskimo Joe. I had a whole plan for Jebediah through to mid next year. And same with Bob Evans. We actually had things completely mapped out. But there's one kind of key thing that sort of sits at the heart of all of this, and at the bedrock of this, is that this COVID-19 crisis has really thrown up how dependent artists are on that one stream of income, performance, touring, live, and how crucial it is to their careers in terms of development and income. And I think that for me has been concerning, because you simply can't create a sustainable career on one key stream of income. So I think there's a bigger question there. And then there's the advantage or disadvantage of releasing now. Somebody told me the other day who works within a distribution company that their release schedule was increased by 50%. So, in fact, releases have increased, at least here locally, and that people have moved a lot of their releases forward. And that's precisely what we've done as well with our artists. So we've said, well, we can't tour, and the plan was to do A, B, and C, and then roll with the tour, do festivals, do other things after that. Instead, we've pretty much completely cut the live element out of it and said, well, let's just focus on the music, which is kind of liberating. Let's just focus on releasing the music, and let's just focus on the plan and the strategy around that. And let's just make that really great. And let's, give people new music, let them enjoy it without any touring plan to follow on the back of that. And for me, it takes a whole layer of stress and strain out of the plan, because a lot of the time that key element sort of does tend to drive a lot of other things. And I think it probably should be the other way around. The music should drive the plan and the touring plan. So with the assumption that we're probably not going to have major scale touring in Australia till 2021, and I say major scale, I'm talking sort of over 1,000 plus capacity. What happens below that before Christmas is a whole other kettle of fish, and that sort of seems to be changing from month to month as we go. We're just literally focusing on releasing music and new music where we never thought we would. So it's been a really great time for that, and that bit I've really enjoyed.
And I mean, I guess things like the vinyl resurgence, have come at an opportune time in that instance, because you've got this whole other avenue of merch and physical distro now that, wasn't there for, well, certainly when I was really growing up, vinyl wasn't really a thing, and it is now, I guess. Chris just mentioned that he had read somewhere that streaming was actually down because people being in lockdown and not commuting. Have you got any comments there about streaming, Jake, or have you sort of heard much about that?
There are conflicting. I've heard that, and I've heard that it's been up as well. I think the general takeaway that I've found that seems to be across the board is that catalog is up. So people aren't really interested in discovering new music. But if you have like a catalog that people are familiar with, they're going to those moments. That's it. But I do think I totally agree with Kath. It's kind of exciting in a way how things have shifted, because I think it's lifted the veil of that basically artists and fans are in a transactional relationship. And I think the industry is like basically a machine that obfuscates that to an extent, where you kind of think that you're buying something else or buying into brands and all these other things, but really it's that relationship. And by the process of artists having to go like, I'm really struggling because I've lost my source of income, it's made it clear that that is actually it's a very simple equation. And I think that that has taken away a lot of stigma that there has been about like that direct to fan model that was traditionally like this idea of like online busking, like, I'll play and please donate to me. Now it seems very understandable that you can be like, if you want to watch me play live online, then you can pay $2. You know, like, and that's okay. That is an exchange of services. And ultimately there's like a lot of other things bedded into that, like wanting to support culture. But it's a very simple equation, and it's effective. Like I found that the Bandcamp revenue waiving days have been very effective.
Yes, there's another one coming up, isn't there? I think, or another. Yeah,
there is. And like I'm actively like just finding things to do. Cloud Nothing's released like 27 live shows across their catalog and sold thousands and thousands. Like they were at $2 each, but it added up. It was a significant amount of money, and I think really was people seeing that like. It was an understanding of the situation, a desire to buy into the culture, but also going that like we're in a transactional relationship. Fans need artists, artists need fans, and that's okay. That's kind of a good thing.
I mean, I was interested in that certainly because at the beginning of this, we always see in these situations people turning to the arts and to music in particular for sort of solace and connection and getting through difficult times. And we did see a lot of artists doing these free sort of live performances, and there was a lot of discussion around how beneficial that is, in terms of undervaluing yourselves and that sort of thing. And then I noticed a few artists cropping up who were then charging, for those kind of things. So I was sort of interested in that.
Well, like the most effective one I've seen is Japanese Breakfast did a stream for her crew and her band. And she used a platform called Noon Chorus. And so basically what that entailed, and I thought it was quite a nice setup, whereas everyone that wanted to, so in sense, it's giving back to the community. And then they were able to generate like a unique link for each promoter that she worked with around the US, which gave the promoters then a split of like the revenue that was derived through them promoting the show. So everyone as part of like the live ecosystem managed to benefit from it. And I don't know if the actual final numbers, but I did see that like there were 5,000 viewers and the tickets were $20. So like there was $100,000 generated from that live stream going out to like many different people around. But like it just shows that like there is the ability to make that kind of like an effective like model.
Jake, could you just say that name again? Sorry, a couple of people have asked.
It's called Noon Chorus. There's a lot of ones that have popped up. That's the one that seems to be the most focused on. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one that seems to be most focused on like independent artists, and they let you embed your merch. They also let you retain rights to the videos, because I think one thing that's interesting is going to come about is that like most record contracts are going to have to be renegotiated to some extent if like streaming does become part, because like they all include like re-recording rights to some extent, and so theoretically there should be licensing paid to like the publishing and master side every time someone does a live stream.
Yeah, there is a new royalty, isn't there? I think for that.
With APRA, there's a whole page on their website about it. It's definitely worth reading, by the way, and you can license back as well. So where you're streaming and it's a really small stream, 50 people or less, there's no point paying licensing fees. You just license back so that you don't have to actually pay those fees.
Kim's just asked whether there might be a period where there's a higher demand for local talent, because obviously we can't have any people coming in. He's wondering whether, you think that'll be offset by fear or restrictions, whether people will be tentative in terms of going back to shows. What do you think about that, Kath?
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation about this amongst agents and promoters that I've been hearing as well, and I think that we're still sort of in a state of suspension in terms of what we know is going to happen. So we are making a lot of guesses about what we think might occur. We don't know how exactly how audience behaviour is going to be. You don't know what whether people are going to have the money to spend on going back into the live market. There might be a difference between, say, the 18 to 24 demographic and, say, the 40 to 55 demographic in terms of income and expendable luxury items, which, by the way, everybody feels now that going to a live gig will be considered as a luxury item, as opposed to just a general accessible thing. Then there's the issue that we have to consider of infrastructure here, production companies, backline, crew, venues, what's going to exist, what's not, the regulations involved in actually having a show at a venue. We know in Victoria, for instance, that we will be able to have smaller live shows here in a matter of weeks, but we do know that they have to be seated, and we do know that they have to be socially distanced, and you can only have so many people in the space, and it has to be obviously measured against that regulatory measurement.
So in terms of like the viability of those shows, are we looking at potential kind of increase in ticket costs and stuff?
Correct. Yeah. This is another conversation, whether what venues will be charging artists, what artists will be able to afford to then on charge to punters. And then, so there's so many variables here. I think it's really almost impossible to know until we get really stuck into it and we see what that behaviour and what those costs and that infrastructure existing will be. But I think we have to keep a very open mind about it. And I think we have to consider that there will be a period of time where things will scale up and that things will be quite expensive for a period of time as well. Yeah. So there are other... and I think we should be looking outside the traditional forms of performance, both in terms of spaces and also the way that we present, I think will change as well. So I think we can just completely reset everything we know and just look outside of the square of what has existed pre-COVID and completely reimagine it. And I think this is the time to do it.
And I mean, there is actually something quite exciting about that prospect.
Oh, very.
The grassroots stuff coming, to the fore or whatever. That's a really, really exciting thing. Yeah, just sort of, I guess, talking a bit more about that. We've got a lot of self-managed artists in the group at the moment. If you don't have your own manager or you're still at that sort of grassroots level, very much in the local scene, what would you suggest, Jake, that people be focusing on at this point in time?
It's interesting. I mean, that is the case, right? Like it is traditionally you'd say, I want to develop my craft and live plays a function in that. That doesn't exist anymore. So I think it would be ascertaining what it actually is that, you would really, where you'd want to be. I think it's a lot of goal setting. And I think that's quite based on like individual desires. And I think then working backwards, I think it's too... Kat is totally right. Like everything is going to be rebuilt, hopefully for the better. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of qualities to the way that things have worked that has not been particularly good or effective. So that it isn't all kind of like a negative in the rebuilding. But I think it would be difficult to start thinking about what live it's going to look like, especially on that level. Some heartening news that I heard recently is that New Zealand have opened up shows. They've got their first shows this weekend. They're being put on. It's socially distanced. There's 100 people in like a 300 or 400 cap room, all seated. And, I was very wary when I heard about it that it would even sell tickets, because it's like, are you going to spend money to go out and have that experience? And it did, they showed it's all sold out in, a couple of days. That's not a huge amount, and it's not really, I don't think, a sample size big enough to take away what everyone's feelings are going to be about going out. But it is encouraging.
And I mean, Anthony suggested as well, maybe is it a time to sort of try something new? There's a lot of grants available for projects and things like that as well. So, whether you're getting into the studio or, you're trying something new, maybe this is a time for that as well.
Yeah, well, I think if there's a fan base there, it would be consolidating and strengthening that relationship and making it as deep as meaningful as possible. And if it isn't, and if it's in that very early stage, it would be really crystallizing what it is that you're doing, asking yourself, you've got time now that no other artists really have had to develop what it is that you want to say. What's your point of view? So the time can be put to good use no matter what.
Yes, I mean, we've sort of talked a little bit about alternative revenue raising. So for you now, Jake, where are you sort of at with your artists in terms of now? How far ahead are you looking? In the middle of next year or the end of next year?
Yeah, about that. It's a moving target. To kind of reiterate the experiences that Kath was talking about. Like, we're rebooking international tour dates for the Beth starting in January. And I was talking to their agent today, and they're like, "Oh, that venue it doesn't exist anymore. We have to go to somewhere else." And so, to say that it's going to be a clear-cut idea, it's a lot of making plans, cancelling, and then making them again. But I feel like that's the only way that we'll get anywhere is by pushing through and remaining positive. So, there will be a time when we will be able to reach the outcome that we want to achieve.
Kath, if people want a bit more support, can you just tell us a little bit about the Association of Artist Managers and exactly what the organisation offers?
Currently, the Association of Artist Managers represents artist managers and their artists, so advocates on behalf of and obviously provides a suite of professional development programs and also connectivity within the community, which we do via social media and various other means, including drop-in Zoom sessions. We are the peak body for artist managers in Australia. We're the second largest peak body for artist managers in the world, behind the MMF UK. We have 3 levels of membership, and the starting level, entry level, is the associate membership, which is $99 a year. And yeah, we provide a support mechanism for our community.
I'll say as well that now is a good time to be in an isolated place. From talking to, as an aside, my brother works at Google, and they're seeing the data that's coming through in terms of what people's habits are. And generally, they're seeing that people are moving away from big cities and moving to affordable, comfortable places because they realise that they don't need to be in a specific place to necessarily achieve what it is that they want to. So, if ever there's a time to feel confident you can do anything from wherever you are, I think it's now.
To back that up by saying I think it's an extremely wonderful time to be an Australian artist in Australia, because I think that there will be, over the coming 12 months, a lot of opportunities particularly for emerging artists that might not have existed previously, because there won't be that filter of international acts coming into Australia, and that does take up a lot of airspace. So I think it's a great time to take advantage of that and to really build on something.
Brilliant. That's a really lovely way to end the session this morning, and hopefully everyone's feeling sort of positive and a little bit energised as well. So thank you so much, to both of you, and thanks to everyone for coming today. It's really been a fantastic session. Kath and Jake, thanks again for your time this morning, and all the best for the next few months as we all go forward.